Hi everyone and welcome back to the lecture of political science. We have studied the Western political thought and I'll continue with the Aristotle series. So in this lecture we'll study and know about the Aristotle views on classification of state and government and his comparison with the Platonic classification, right? And we'll also discuss the theory of cyclic change and also Aristotle's principle of golden mean and also the Aristotle's best practicable state, and basically what is the concept of polity that Aristotle has presented. So I have already covered the introduction part of Aristotle, so you can visit my channel and watch the previous video on that. Besides this, I'll also place the link in the description box below. So enough of me elaborating, so we would begin with the main topic, which is Aristotle views on classification of state and government. Now Aristotle's views over the classification of state and government. Aristotle जो था ना, he's regarded as Plato's greatest rivals in the history of political thought, because both of the philosophers like Aristotle and Plato's have the views which are very diverging and conflicting views हैं. दोनों के बहुत ज़्यादा opposite है, because both जो दोनों के जो views हैं they are poles apart, right? So Aristotle was the greatest disciple of Plato, and उसने जो theories दी हैं तो वो बिल्कुल इन opposite direction में है प्लाटो के. ठीक है, तो अब जो स्टेट होता है, स्टेट इज़ बेसिकली अ कम्युनिटी ऑफ पर्सन्स, एंड जो गवर्नमेंट होती है, government is basically a concrete and tangible organization which implements the will of a state. Now what is the will of a state? State की एक will क्या होगी? To secure the good of life, like for its people. ठीक है, so this is the definition of state and government, but the criteria and basis of classification which Aristotle had presented. So Aristotle basically classified states on the following two bases. Now one is quantitative classification and the other is qualitative classification, right? Now quantitative classification जो है ना, it is like the number of those in which the sovereign power is vested. Now on quantitative side, Aristotle talks about on the basis of number of people who are ruling. ठीक है, एक बंदा रूल कर रहा है, कितने लोग रूल कर रहे हैं, so it would define that like with whom and in whom the sovereign power is vested. Now if we look into the qualitative side, it means that according to Aristotle, like the end or purpose towards which the power was directed, right? Like he's talking about on the basis of purpose, like normal in the interest of people, like the good, and if it's corrupt, so it's like self interest of the ruling class. So this is the purpose, राइट. अगर जनरल विल है, कॉमन वेलफेयर है, ठीक है, तो फिर इट इज़ लाइक इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द पीपल, पर्पस बता रहे हैं ना. एंड करप्ट है तो फिर लाइक इग्नोरिंग द कॉमन वेलफेयर या पिवटेड फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट है. ठीक है, प्योर गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, वर्चुअस गवर्नमेंट नहीं है. ठीक है, इट इज़ करप्ट, इट इज़ बेनिफिटिंग द रूलर्स, इट इज़ फॉर द बेनिफिटिंग ऑफ द रूलर्स इट सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट है रूलर्स का, राइट. सो एरिस्टोटल बेसिकली स्टार्टेड 158 कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. इसीलिए एरिस्टोटल को के मेथड को साइंटिफिक मेथड भी कहा जाता है, बिकॉज देन ही मेड अ कंपैरिजन. एंड इसी तरह जो है ना, उसने फिर बेस्ट प्रैक्टिकेबल स्टेट की थ्योरी दी थी, दैट बेस्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट इज़, वील डिस्कस दैट लेटर ऑन. मैं आपको बताऊंगी कि अकॉर्डिंग टू एरिस्टोटल बेस्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट कौन सी गवर्नमेंट है. ठीक है, सो एरिस्टोटल वाज लाइक ऑफ द व्यू दैट व्हेन द हेड ऑफ द स्टेट इज एम्ड एट गुड ऑफ द कम्युनिटी, द स्टेट वुड बी द प्योर फॉर्म. बट व्हेन द रूलर्स इन द स्टेट बिकम सेल्फिश एंड देन दे यूज पावर फॉर देयर ओन बेनिफिट्स, द स्टेट वुड बी कॉल्ड एज अ पिवटेड फॉर्म. मैंने आपको पहले भी बताया, दैट्स बेसिकली अ डेविएंट फॉर्म, डाइवर्टेड फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट होती है. ठीक है, करप्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट होती है. सो दिस वाज अ थ्योरी ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ एरिस्टोटल, कि उसने कहा था कि लाइक व्हेन द स्टेट्स द रूलर्स ऑफ द स्टेट्स आर गुड, इट इज़ प्योर फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट, एंड व्हेन दे दैट्स करप्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट, इट मीन्स इट इज़ पिवटेड फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट. ठीक है, सो दिस इज़ एरिस्टोटल्स क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ गवर्नमेंट। उसने कुछ इस तरह डिवीज़न की है क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ गवर्नमेंट की। इफ़ यू टॉक अबाउट द क्वांटिटेटिव साइड या उसका पर्सपेक्टिव लें तो ही वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट लाइक ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ नंबर ऑफ पीपल हु आर रूलिंग, ऑन द नंबर लाइक basis of person who are ruling, like if it's one, two, or few or many. And then if we talk about the qualitative side, like on the basis of purpose, ठीक है, पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट है या सेल्फिश इंटरेस्ट है, ठीक है, मतलब कि वर्चुअस फॉर्म है, प्योर फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट है विच सीक्स द कॉमन वेलफेयर, ठीक है, सबको बेनिफिट कर रही है, तो वो कौन सी गवर्नमेंट है। एंड इफ़ सेल्फिश इंटरेस्ट जो है तो वो प्रिवेटेड फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट है, लाइक इट इग्नोर्स द कॉमन वेलफेयर, मतलब करप्ट गवर्नमेंट है बेनिफिटिंग द रूलर्स themselves, right? तो अगर वन है, वन पावर resides with one person, so that's monarchy, but its pivoted form is tyranny, ठीक है। So according to Aristotle, pure monarchy or royalty is the government by one in the interest of all. But when it degenerates into a selfish rule of one, it becomes tyranny. And then similarly again he says that when a few rule for the common good of all, it is aristocracy. But when they start ruling for their own self-interest, it is pivoted into oligarchy. And then similarly he again says that the rule of many for the sake of everyone, Aristotle calls it polity, ठीक है, या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेमोक्रेसी, ठीक है। एंड ही ऑल्सो कॉल्स इट अ माइल्ड डेमोक्रेसी, नॉट द एक्सट्रीम फॉर्म ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी, बट व्हेन दे रूल विद अ व्यू टू प्रमोट देयर ओन क्लास इंटरेस्ट, देन इट बिकम्स डेमोक्रेसी। इसको ओहलोक्रेसी भी कहते हैं या मॉब रूल भी, इसको एरिस्टोटल ने डिफाइन किया है, ठीक है। सो आई विल टेल यू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेमोक्रेसी, इस पे एरिस्टोटल का फोकस था। एरिस्टोटल यूजेस द टर्म पॉलिटी फॉर दैट बिकॉज where the modern world prefers democracy, his democracy is today's mob rule, and that's like an equivalent to Aristotle's polity, may be defined as an unselfish rule of many for the common welfare, ठीक है। उसने पॉलिटी को बेस्ट प्रैक्टिकेबल स्टेट वो किया है, कहा है, उसने कहा है कि लाइक इट इज़ द अनसेल्फिश रूल ऑफ मैनी, ठीक है। एंड ही कॉल्स इट अ पॉलिटी विच इज़ अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेमोक्रेसी। I hope that's very clear enough because it's very easy. You just have to make your concepts clear, that how Aristotle makes a distinction and classification of government, right? And how he gives later the theory of best practicable state, that what is the system which is best suitable and which is best practicable over the world, right? So you just have to be clear regarding these things, and you have to make your concepts clear, right? Okay, so comparison with Platonic classification. Now, let me make one thing clear and very certain, like whenever we are studying about Western political thought or Western philosophy, even Muslim political thought or Muslim philosophy, it is always, preferred that one should make a comparison among philosophers, especially like those philosophers who have presented similar concept theories or similar philosophies, right? So I'll give you the best example, like जैसे कि but there's a Western political philosopher जो कि है हॉब्स, थॉमस हॉब्स है, जॉन लॉक है, रूसो है. I've made lectures and videos on them as well, on their कॉन्सेप्ट और द ओरिजिन ऑफ स्टेट, या उनका स्टेट ऑफ जो नेचर था, उस पर मैंने पहले भी प्रीवियसली वीडियो, आई हैव ऑलरेडी मेड दोज लेक्चर्स. सो इफ़ यू आर इंटरेस्टेड यू कैन विजिट दोज लेक्चर्स. एंड तो जैसे इनका कंपैरिजन किया जाता है, इनकी थ्योरीज़ को कंपेयर किया जाता है, इनके कॉन्सेप्ट्स को, तो इस तरह लाइक उनका जो जिस स्टेट का कॉन्सेप्ट का कंपैरिजन किया था हॉब्स, लॉक और रूसो का, तो यहाँ पे लाइक एरिस्टोटल्स कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ गवर्नमेंट इज़ कंपेयर्ड विद दैट ऑफ प्लाटोज, लाइक प्लेटोनिक क्लासिफिकेशन के साथ किया जाता है, ठीक है. सो it is very clear that though being a pioneer and disciple like Plato is not consistent, and in his classification he classified twice in his two different works, which are the very famous works of Plato, which is the Republic and the Statesman. ये प्लाटो की दो मेजर बुक्स थी, एक दी लॉज भी थी और भी थी बुक्स, बट दीज आर द फेमस वंस. सो प्लाटो ने जो क्लासिफिकेशन की थी, उसने ही बेसिकली देयर आर 3 वर्जन्स ऑफ हिज फर्स्ट क्लासिफिकेशन, ठीक है। उसने क्लासीफाई किया था गवर्नमेंट को लाइक द फर्स्ट इज़ दैट देयर इज़ द स्टेट ऑफ परफेक्ट नॉलेज। हेयर प्लाटो हैड टॉक्ड अबाउट द रियल सॉवरन इज नॉलेज लाइक विच इज़ गवर्नड बाय अ philosopher king. Like there's no place for law in this type of government, as the king is basically endowed with the all types of knowledge, and he rules, and it is that kind of justice, right? So it was just an imaginary ideal state, ठीक है, यूटोपियन concept था which never existed anywhere. even history में भी, ह्यूमन हिस्ट्री में भी ऐसा कोई स्टेट एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करा था, ठीक है। तो प्लाटो का जो कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एन आइडियल स्टेट था दैट वाज वेरी मच इमेजिनरी विच वाज वेरी इम्प्रैक्टिकल एंड इलॉजिकल भी था, और ठीक है एग्जिस्ट नहीं किया था उसने, इट वाज वेरी मच यूटोपियन, ठीक है। तो वो बेसिकली एक आइडियल था, बट फॉर प्लाटो आइडियल वाज द रियल। So he basically presented that the rule of a philosopher king which was very idealistic in nature. तो वो एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं किया था ना, प्लाटो का जो कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एन आइडियल स्टेट था, ठीक है। बट फॉर प्लाटो आइडियल वॉज द रियल, लाइक उसने ये कॉन्सेप्ट इसीलिए प्रेजेंट किया था दैट द गवर्नमेंट शुड या द पीपल शुड ट्राई टू अचीव दैट काइंड ऑफ अ स्टेट, ठीक है, क्योंकि वो प्लाटो के लिए वो परफेक्ट था। नाउ द सेकेंड फॉर्म वॉज दैट स्टेट ऑफ इम्परफेक्ट नॉलेज। नाउ actually that was kind of a state where people respected laws because there was lack of a philosopher king, the rule of a philosopher king, and imperfection led to the requirement of the direction of laws, ठीक है। So for Plato it was kind of a state of imperfect knowledge, but he also gave this the third concept in classification which he said that state the state of lack of knowledge, ठीक है। तो these are the states of ignorance, ठीक है, according to Plato, because laws existed but they were never followed and it was kind of a state of the fools, ठीक है। so Plato ने इस तरह की classification दी थी, and if we compared it with Aristotle's classification of state, तो Aristotle ने उसको define किया था perfectly कि मतलब अगर rule of one है so it's monarchy and its perverted is tyranny, if it's rule of few the best is aristocracy and perverted is oligarchy, and if it's the rule of many, the best one is constitutional democracy or the polity, the rule of a middle class, but the perverted form is democracy, and Aristotle calls democracy as the rule of ignorant people, right? Now Aristotle's cycle of the government, this is basically the theory of cyclic change. Now Aristotle tries to find out the development of states and their cycle of change, like how the states had developed and how like they changed into another form of government, like their cycle of change, because Aristotle at one time he said that change has taken place in all forms of administration because it is obvious that change will take place. So that was kind of a natural process because all forms of state revolve like a wheel of cycle. Like at one time if it's for example monarchy, तो टाइम के साथ साथ चेंज हो के वो प्रिवेटेड फॉर्म में आ जाएगी क्योंकि वो करप्ट हो जाती है, तो इट वुड बी टायरनी, राइट। सो ही एक्सप्लेन्स इट इन अ मैनर दैट द फर्स्ट गवर्नमेंट्स वर किंगशिप एंड probably for this reason in old times, like when cities were basically small and when men of eminent virtues were very few, बहुत थोड़े लोग होते थे, so they were made kings because they were made benefactors and hence hence the benefits could only be bestowed by virtuous men, ठीक है। उसने इस तरह एक्सप्लेन किया था, but when many persons equal on merit arose, so against preeminence of one, so they formed a commonwealth and then they set up a constitution, and the ruling class soon deteriorated and then they enriched themselves out of a public treasury, right? So riches became a path to honor and hence oligarchies grew up. This is how that oligarchy was evolved. This is the process of evolution. So they passed into tyrannies and then tyrannies into democracies, and the love of grain of the ruling classes always tended to diminish, like ठीक है, वैनिश हो जाती थी. So their numbers and then the masses were basically strengthened, ठीक है। तो the masses in the end and then they set up the masters and then that's how they established democracies. तो एरिस्टोटल की जो theory of cyclic change है इसने इस सबको इस तरह define किया था, and that's how the cycle of political change continuously evolves this way, right? The golden mean, the doctrine of golden mean. सो ये तो हम पहले पढ़ चुके हैं दैट प्लाटो इज़ रेडिकल एंड एरिस्टोटल इज़ बेसिकली कंजर्वेटिव। ठीक है, इनकी ये डिफरेंस है। लाइक एरिस्टोटल डजंट सपोर्ट फॉर रीचिंग आउट चेंजेस एंड प्लाटो ही इज़ काइंड ऑफ अ परफेक्शनिस्ट आइडियलिस्ट। प्लाटो को कहा जाता है बाय एरिस्टोटल इज़ रियलिस्ट, राइट? बिकॉज प्लाटो इज़ परफेक्शनिस्ट, तो ही गोज इनटू एक्सट्रीम्स, बट एरिस्टोटल बिलीव्स इन मिडल path basically, or we can call it a golden mean. ठीक है, it means that he believes in moderation. Moderate is, for him, moderate is best. According to Aristotle, one should not sacrifice good for the sake of best, because best is unachievable. Now if we compare it with Plato had presented everything in his best form, like ठीक है, perfect dimensions पे सब कुछ था, because for Plato ideal was the real, right? So for Aristotle, virtue is to be found in golden mean, which evolves finding balance between the two modes, या mean हम कह देते हैं इसको, ठीक है? Like we can become good by finding the middle point between the two extreme. Now one point is the excessive and एक्सेस पॉइंट, ठीक है, एंड द अदर इज़ डेफिशिएंसी, ठीक है, मतलब कम है. सो वी हैव टू फाइंड अ गोल्डन मीन विच इज़ अ गोल्डन पाथ फॉर लाइफ, फॉर द होल ऑफ लाइफ, ठीक है? एक्सट्रीम या पोल्स अपार्ट की तरफ नहीं जाना चाहिए, ठीक है? सो द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एरिस्टोटल्स थ्योरी ऑफ गोल्डन मीन इज़ रिप्रेजेंटेड इन हिज वर्क विच इज़ निकोमैकियन एथिक्स बेसिकली, on the basis of which Aristotle tries to find out a middle path for the government, ठीक है? Because which is best stable in comparison to others. Moral behavior is the mean between two extremes, right? At one end it's excess form and the other is its deficiency. Now to find out a moderate position between those two extremes, you will have to be acting morally, ठीक है? तो he means that the state must choose a middle path for governance, right? And that government is best, ठीक है, which does not run towards any extremes, like which includes the representation form of all from all sections of society and works for the whole common good. Now the moment it leans towards a particular side, then it loses the control and then change happen, and then that's the cyclic change of political system occurs, right? तो ये वो टाइम होता है when it goes to the extreme poles, या ठीक है, एक्सट्रीम पोल्स की तरफ जाता है. सो दैट्स when the cyclic change of political system occurs. So for Aristotle, the best practicable government according to Aristotle's theory is the one which follows the middle path and implements public policies. And for Aristotle, the best practicable state is polity, which is a constitutional democracy, right? The rule of a middle class. He calls it a polity. So polity, the rule of law, is the best practicable state or form for Aristotle because it is the moderation, right? So application of golden mean in this theory, in his theory, like polity is kind of a golden mean of oligarchy and democracy. So in this, we are doing the application of principle of golden mean, and we are saying that polity is the best practicable form because on one extreme pole there's oligarchy, and then on the other extreme pole there's this democracy, right? So Aristotle makes a distinction that oligarchy is the rule of few rich people and democracy is the rule of masses, which are the ignorant people, right? So democracy is the rule of many, right? And polity is also the rule of law, rule of many, but not so many. The rule of a middle class avoids extreme of the two systems, ठीक है? Rule of the rich, but not extremely rich, and middle class also possesses reason. This is what according to Aristotle's beliefs, ठीक है? He says that in polity, each citizen is to possess his own arm, which are not supplied or owned by the state. So Aristotle says that a rule of a middle class is always better because both rich and poor are susceptible to in crimes, and they are and the rich commits crime out of arrogance and the poor commits crime out of ignorance. So nobody will trust each other. Either the rule will not, and either of the rule will not be stable as well. So both poles trust the middle class, which is more stable, and that's how Aristotle says that polity is the best form of government. Now, the best practicable state for Aristotle is that the balance of democracy and oligarchy, but there are two contending forces in any society. ठीक है, एक तरफ oligarchic force है और दूसरी तरफ democratic force है. But the best produce is to balance each other against the other to achieve stability and the balance, right? So to the state may achieve this stability by lodging power in the middle class. ठीक है, तो पॉलिटी इज़ द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ गोल्डन मीन. अब हम देखें तो हर स्टेट में देयर इज़ दिस रिच क्लास, मिडिल क्लास एंड पुअर क्लास. तो रिच क्लास में क्या होता है कि द क्लास हैज़ टू मैनी एडवांटेजेस, राइट. दे आर अनविलिंग टू एक्सेप्ट डिसिप्लिन. द रिच ओनली नो हाउ टू कमांड एंड दैट्स काइंड ऑफ अ प्री ऑक्यूपाइड विद द थॉट ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी. उनके पास प्रॉपर्टी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है. इफ़ यू लुक इन टू द पुअर क्लास, सो वेरी they are having very few advantage, and they also lack spirit as well, and they understand only obedience. तो revolutionary tendencies भी इनकी होती हैं. तो मतलब ये तो बहुत extreme classes हैं. ठीक है, rich के पास power है, advantages हैं, ठीक है, they know only how to command, they are having property. But the poor class are having a very few advantages. They only know how to do the obedience, and they are having a revolutionary tendencies. But the middle class के साथ, if Aristotle have explicitly defined middle class, that they are more inclined to reason. They are not very poor to be degraded, and they are not too rich to become fictitious, and they are having some friendly community spirit as well. But देयर कम्स अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एज वेल, कि प्रॉपर्टी किसके पास रिसाइड की जाएगी. जैसे प्लाटो का कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी था, जो कि उसने दो क्लासेस से ले लिया था. ठीक है, द गार्डियन क्लास से लिया था, द रूलिंग क्लास से भी लिया था. ठीक है, प्लाटो अबॉलिश द राइट ऑफ प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी, बट एरिस्टोटल ही टॉक्स अबाउट डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव प्रॉपर्टी among the middle class to balance, because middle class will not interfere in the governmental affairs and will be kind of a balancing force of democracy and oligarchy. So Aristotle talks about a distributive property to the middle class. So this was all about the theory of classification of state and government, and Aristotle had presented the concept of best practicable state. So I hope that's very much clear enough. Basically ये बहुत easy है concepts if one can easily grasp and comprehend such concepts and philosophies, and then make a comparison for their better understanding. So that's how a Western philosophy is to be studied, and that's very amazing and बहुत interesting topic है. One has the interest in Western philosophy, it's very interesting. So yeah, this was all, and thanks for watching. So if you like the video, please give this video a thumbs up, and I'll be coming up with more interesting lectures of Western political thought and that of Aristotle's other philosophies and concepts. If you have any queries regarding anything, you can drop a mail on the email address which is provided on the screen. And until then, take care of yourselves. Bye. Take care. Allah Hafiz.